I'm going to write this one with care. A betrayal by a best friend who marries the ex-husband is a particularly intimate kind of wound, and the quiet legal resolution through a hidden patent will need to land as earned, not convenient. Here we go. The day I signed my divorce papers, my best friend of 19 years posted photos from her honeymoon with my ex-husband, tagging me with a heart emoji and the caption, "Love finds a way." They were in Santorini. White buildings, blue water, her hand with the new ring resting on his chest. The heart emoji sat in my notifications like a piece of glass I couldn't stop touching. And I understood in that moment that some betrayals are so complete they loop back around to a kind of dark comedy. She thought we were still friends. She thought the heart was kind. If you want to know what I did about it, and what I'd been quietly sitting on for 7 years that neither of them knew existed, stay to the end. The resolution took 2 years and never made a sound. My name is Iris Fenton, and I teach rhetoric and composition at Lane Community College in Eugene, Oregon, where the rain comes down like an argument you can't win, and the students show up in fleece and optimism, hoping 2 years here will catapult them somewhere else. I have taught the same 5 courses for 11 years. I grade essays in pencil, never pen. Because erasure is an act of respect, it says, this is not permanent, you can still fix it. I think in drafts. First draft, second draft, final. I think in thesis statements and supporting evidence, and the point at which an argument either holds or falls apart under scrutiny. It is the way my mind was built, long before I started teaching it, and it's the reason I survived what came next. I know the difference between a narrative and the truth. I know that a story someone tells about themselves is just a first draft, and that if you wait long enough, the revisions reveal everything. I met Sam Hewitt when I was 24, in a coffee shop on Willamette Street where I was grading essays and he was pretending to write a novel. He had the kind of face that photographs well-sharp jaw, dark eyes, an easy smile, and he bought me a refill without asking, which I thought was charming and later understood was the opening move of a man who doesn't wait for permission. We were married within a year. I was young enough to think speed meant passion, and he was just old enough to know better but not care. Sam worked in tech, which in Eugene meant a small software startup that would probably fail but might not, the kind of maybe fortune that keeps a certain kind of man inflated with certainty. He was a project manager, which meant he talked about other people's work as if it were his own, and he was good at it. The talking, I mean. He could sell anything. He sold me on a future that looked like success and felt like being managed. I met Vanessa Krill my second week of graduate school, in a seminar on narrative theory where she sat in the back and interrupted the professor twice with points so sharp the room went quiet. She had red hair she wore in a braid, a loud laugh, and a way of making you feel like the only person in a room even when the room was full. We were inseparable for 19 years. She was my maid of honor. I was hers, twice, once when she married a kind, boring man named Eric, and once, apparently, when she married Sam, though I was not invited to that one. Vanessa was a UX designer, which meant she thought about how people interacted with screens, how to make technology feel intuitive, frictionless, invisible. She was good at it. She worked freelance, built a client base, and somewhere in the long years of our friendship, she started working with Sam's startup on a contract basis. I introduced them. I want to be clear about that. I put them in a room together and I never once thought to worry, because I had spent 19 years believing Vanessa was the kind of person who would tell me if my hair looked bad or if I was about to make a mistake, and I thought that kind of honesty was the same as loyalty. It isn't. Honesty is just accuracy. Loyalty is what you do with it. The marriage to Sam lasted 6 years. For the first 3, I told myself we were happy, which is what you do when happiness is the draft you're working from and you haven't yet noticed the argument is falling apart under scrutiny. He worked long hours. I worked long hours. We were 2 ambitious people living parallel lives in the same house, and I mistook the lack of friction for compatibility. Vanessa was there through all of it. Every dinner party, every holiday, every small grievance I brought to her about Sam's schedule or his tone or the way he'd started talking to me like I was a student who hadn't done the reading. She listened. She nodded. She gave advice that, in retrospect, always seemed designed to keep me exactly where I was. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe you're being too sensitive. Maybe marriage is just hard. And I thought she was being a good friend. I didn't understand she was workshopping a role. The divorce was my idea, which surprised Sam. And that surprise told me everything I needed to know about how he'd been seeing me. He thought I was the dependent variable. I filed on a Tuesday after a weekend where he'd looked at me across the kitchen table and said, You're not actually as smart as you think you are, in the same tone he used to critique a product demo. And something in me, the part trained to recognize a failed argument, simply refused to submit a revision. I said, I want a divorce. And he laughed, assuming I was workshopping the line. When I handed him the papers 3 days later, the laugh disappeared, and what replaced it was not sadness, it was logistics. How much would it cost him? What would people think? Whether this would interfere with a funding round. Vanessa, during this entire period, was a model of support. She brought wine, she listened to me cry, she told me I was brave, that I deserved better, that Sam had never appreciated me. She helped me pack. She was there the day I moved out, carrying boxes, hugging me in the driveway, telling me this was the beginning of something better. I believed her. I had 19 years of evidence that Vanessa told me the truth. The divorce was final on a Thursday in March. Oregon is a no-fault state, which means you don't have to prove cruelty or betrayal. You just have to prove the marriage is broken. And ours was so thoroughly broken even Sam didn't bother contesting it. We split the assets down the middle, the house sold, the savings divided, no alimony, no drama. I walked out with exactly half of a life I no longer wanted, which felt, at the time, like freedom. Vanessa called me that night. She asked how I was. I said I was fine, and I meant it, I was. There's a relief that comes when you stop defending a thesis that was never sound. She said she was proud of me. She said she loved me. She said, let's get dinner soon, just us, celebrate you. We never got that dinner. Because 2 weeks later, I saw her car in Sam's driveway. I was driving past not on purpose, just the route home from campus, and there it was, her green Subaru with the coexist sticker, parked in the spot that used to be mine. I slowed, but I didn't stop. I told myself there were a dozen reasons. A work meeting. She was helping him with something. I told myself I was being paranoid, that divorce makes you see betrayal everywhere. A month later, they were publicly together, not hiding it. Instagram official. Photos of the two of them hiking, at the coast, at the same restaurants we'd gone to as a trio. I waited for Vanessa to tell me. I waited for a call, a text, an apology, an explanation. Nothing, just the slow accumulation of public evidence, like a draft being revised in real time where I'd been edited out entirely. I finally called her. I asked, calm as I could, what was happening, and Vanessa said, in the same voice she'd used for 19 years to tell me my hair looked bad or I'd made a mistake, Iris, we didn't plan this. It just happened. And honestly, you two were over. You can't expect us to put our lives on hold because you're uncomfortable. You were in my wedding, I said. I was, she said. And you've moved on, and now I'm moving on. I hope you can be happy for me. She said it like a thesis statement, clean, confident, as if the argument held. I did not scream. I did not cry. I said, okay, and I hung up. And I sat very still in my small apartment off 18th Avenue, and I thought about the difference between a narrative and the truth, and I understood that Vanessa had been revising this story for a long time, maybe years, and I had been too busy grading other people's essays to notice the edits happening in my own life. 3 months later, they were engaged. 6 months after that, married. I was not invited. I learned about the wedding the same way I learned about the engagement. Instagram. A photo of her in white, him in gray, the two of them on a beach at sunset, and the caption, love finds a way. And then the honeymoon photos. Santorini. The heart emoji. The tag. That's when I started laughing. Not bitterness, though there was some, but genuine bewildered laughter at the audacity of it. The absolute confidence that she could rewrite 19 years of friendship into a story where she was the hero and I was just a chapter she'd moved past. The heart emoji wasn't cruelty. It was worse. It was genuine. She thought we were still friends. She thought I'd be happy for her. I want to tell you what I did next. But first I need to tell you about the patent. Because the patent is the only reason this story resolves the way it does, and it's the thing neither Sam nor Vanessa ever knew existed. 7 years before the divorce, when Sam's startup was still finding its feet, I did something I've never told anyone about until the lawyer asked. Sam came home one night, frustrated, talking about a problem the dev team couldn't solve. They were building a platform project management software, the kind that tries to predict bottlenecks and resource allocation using workflow data. The concept was sound, but the execution kept breaking down. They couldn't get the algorithm to adapt in real time without either overcorrecting or freezing entirely. He ranted about it for an hour. I listened the way I always listened, which is to say I was grading essays at the kitchen table and offering occasional hums of sympathy. But I was also thinking, because the problem he was describing was a rhetoric problem dressed up in code. It was about weighing inputs, adjusting for bias, responding to conflicting evidence without collapsing the argument. It was everything I taught, just in a different language. I spent the weekend working on it, Not coding, I'm not a developer, but mapping the logic, the decision tree, the way you'd weight competing claims in a rhetorical analysis and arrive at a supported conclusion. I wrote it out longhand, the whole framework, 20 pages of diagrams and pseudo-logic, and I handed it to Sam on Monday morning and said, "Try this." He looked at it for maybe 5 minutes. Then he took it to work. A week later, he came home and said, "That thing you wrote, it worked. The dev team implemented it and it's smooth now. We're calling it adaptive weighting. You're a genius." I wasn't a genius. I just knew how arguments worked. Sam asked if I wanted credit. He said it as a formality, the way you offer someone the last piece of cake you've already decided to eat. I said no. I didn't need credit. I didn't work in tech. I had tenure-track teaching and a dissertation to finish. I thought it was a nice thing I'd done for my husband, the kind of partnership marriage is supposed to be. He kissed me. He said I'd save the company. And then he never mentioned it again. Except, and this is the part I didn't know until 2 years after the divorce, Sam's company filed for a patent on the adaptive weighting algorithm. Not Sam personally, the company, which was standard, but the patent application, which I eventually got a copy of, listed the invention as a system and method for dynamic resource allocation using iterative rhetorical weighting, and the initial documentation, buried in the file the lawyer subpoenaed, included my 20 handwritten pages, scanned, with my name on them, dated, and a single email from Sam to the dev lead that said, "Wife solved it," attaching her notes. "Let's build from this." I didn't know any of this when I handed Sam those pages. I didn't ask what happened to them. I didn't follow up. I went back to teaching. But the law is specific about invention. If you create the foundational logic for a patented process, you're an inventor, whether or not your name made it onto the final application. And if the company that filed the patent used your work without compensating you or listing you as a co-inventor, you have a claim. Not a maybe claim. A legal, enforceable, financially significant claim. I found out about it by accident, 18 months after the divorce was final. I was contacted by a patent lawyer named Elliot Ng, who worked for a firm in Portland that specialized in intellectual property disputes. He'd been hired by a third party. He wouldn't say who to investigate the origins of a piece of technology they were considering licensing. That technology was Sam's adaptive weighting algorithm, which by then had become the core feature of the project management platform his company had sold to a much larger corporation for a sum I later learned was just under $40 million. Elliot asked me, very politely, if I'd ever contributed to the development of the algorithm. I told him about the weekend, the 20 pages, the problem I'd solved. He asked if I had copies. I didn't. It had been 7 years, and I'd thought of it as a dinner table favor, not a document worth saving. But I had something else. I had a blog I'd kept in graduate school, mostly abandoned, where I'd occasionally sketched out ideas I was working through. And I had, the same weekend I'd solved Sam's problem, posted a brief entry, 3 paragraphs, not even about Sam, just me working through the concept of weighting competing claims in real-time argument analysis. The post was dated. It was public. It was proof I'd been thinking about the exact framework Sam's company later patented, weeks before the company filed. Elliot went quiet on the phone. Then he said, "Miss Fenton, I'm going to need you to not delete that blog." What followed was not dramatic. It was paper. Forms, depositions, subpoenas, the slow mechanical grinding of the legal system working through a problem no one wanted to go to trial over. Elliot's firm took my case on contingency, which meant they believed I'd win. The evidence was clean, my handwritten pages in the company's files, my blog post with the timestamp, Sam's email saying wife solved it, and the patent itself, which used language so close to my original notes that a first-year rhetoric student could have traced the lineage. The company no longer Sam's, he'd sold it and moved on, wanted to settle. They did not want the patent invalidated, and they did not want the public story of a community college professor whose uncredited work had been worth $40 million. Bad optics. Worse, uncertain law. If we went to trial and I won, they'd owe me not just a share of the sale but damages, and the patent itself might be voided, which would torpedo the licensing deals they'd built on top of it. Elliot told me we could go loud, we could file publicly, make it a story, turn me into a symbol of uncredited women in tech, or we could go quiet, settle for a number that would set me up for life, and bind the whole thing under an NDA that meant I'd never be able to tell anyone what I'd done or what it was worth. I chose quiet, not out of fear, and not because I didn't want to be a symbol. I just didn't want to be a story. I'd spent 11 years teaching students to build arguments, and I knew the difference between winning a point and winning a fight. A loud case would take years. It would consume me. It would make me into a narrative other people would argue about, and I would spend the rest of my life being introduced as the woman who sued her ex-husband's company, which is a kind of fame I have never wanted. The quiet settlement let me win without becoming the story. It let me take the money, walk away, and go back to teaching, which was and remains the only work I've ever wanted to do. The number was significant. I won't say the exact figure NDA, but I'll say it was enough that I never have to teach another overloaded composition class unless I want to, and I want to, so I do. The settlement took 9 months to finalize. During those 9 months, Sam had no idea. Vanessa had no idea. They were busy being married, posting photos of their remodeled house, their weekend trips, their new life built on the foundation of my old one, and, as it turned out, my uncredited work. I thought about telling them. There were days I drafted the email in my head, imagining the moment Sam realized that the algorithm that had made him a small fortune and a reputation as someone who understood adaptive systems had come from his ex-wife. The one he'd told wasn't as smart as she thought. I imagined Vanessa's face, the same Vanessa who told me I needed to move on, learning that I'd moved on to a settlement larger than anything either of them would see again. But I didn't tell them, because telling them would have been the first draft reactive, satisfying in the moment, ultimately shallow. I wanted the final draft. I wanted them to live the rest of their lives never knowing that the thing they thought they'd moved past, the person they thought they'd edited out, had been holding a piece of their foundation the entire time, and had quietly removed it, and had walked away with it, and they would never know why the house they built felt just slightly unsteady. The NDA meant I couldn't talk about the case. It didn't mean I couldn't live my life differently. So I did. I quit my job at Lane not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And for the first time in my adult life, I could afford to want things without checking the price. I took a year off. I traveled, which is a thing I'd always said I'd do someday, and someday, it turned out, had arrived. I went to Ireland, to Montreal, to a writer's residency in Vermont where I finally finished the book I'd been drafting for a decade, not a novel, a collection of essays about rhetoric and silence, about the arguments we don't have and what they cost us. It was published by a small university press. It sold modestly. It won a minor award. I don't think Sam or Vanessa know it exists, and that's fine. It wasn't for them. When I came back to Eugene, I didn't go back to Lane. I took a position at the University of Oregon, better pay, smaller classes, the kind of job I'd been told I wasn't quite qualified for, except now I had the time and money to get qualified, to publish, to build the resume that opened the door. I bought a house, not a big one, but mine, in the South Hills with a view of the city and a study where I grade essays in pencil and think, sometimes, about the difference between what people believe about you and what's true, and how much power there is in letting them keep believing the wrong thing. I ran into Vanessa 2 years after the settlement, at a farmer's market on 8th Street. I saw her before she saw me. She was at a vegetable stand, picking through tomatoes, her red braid gone gray at the roots, and for a moment I considered turning around. But I didn't. I walked up. I said hello. She startled. She looked at me like I was a ghost, which I suppose I was, the friend she'd tried to revise out of the story, showing up in produce. She recovered quickly. Vanessa was always good at recovering. She smiled. She said my name like we'd just seen each other last week. She asked how I was. I'm well, I said. I'm teaching at UO now. I published a book. I traveled. I'm good. Her smile tightened, just a little, just enough. That's great, she said. I heard you left Lane. We wondered what you were up to, as if she and Sam sat around wondering about me, as if I were a minor subplot they occasionally revisited. How's Sam? I asked, because I genuinely wanted to know. He's great, Vanessa said, and the brightness in her voice had an edge to it. The same edge I used to hear when she talked about Eric, the first husband, the boring one. He's consulting now. The company sold, so he's doing advisory work. We're doing well, I nodded. I didn't mention the settlement. I didn't mention the patent. I didn't even hint. I just said, I'm glad, and I meant it in the way you mean. I'm glad you're living the life you chose, which is not the same as I'm glad you're happy, but close enough that she took it as kindness. We parted with a hug that neither of us meant. She said we should get coffee sometime. I said sure, knowing we wouldn't. And I walked back to my car with a bag of tomatoes and the strange light feeling of having seen someone who once meant everything and now meant almost nothing, and that nothingness was not bitterness. It was just fact. I never told her. I never told Sam. The NDA technically prevented me from discussing the case, but more than that, I simply didn't want to. Telling them would have scratched an itch that was no longer there. The betrayal had hurt God. It had hurt. That first year, the kind of hurt that makes you question every memory, every dinner, every moment you thought was friendship and might have been performance. But hurt is a draft. You revise it, you cut what doesn't serve the argument, and the final draft of my life, the one I was living now, had no room for their validation or their regret. They were minor characters in a story I'd moved past. They didn't need to know how it ended. There's a concept I teach in Rhetoric 101 that I think about often: the distinction between ethos, pathos, and logos, character, emotion, logic. Most people, when they're hurt, argue from pathos. They want the other person to feel what they felt. They want the emotional ledger balanced. But pathos is the weakest form of argument because it requires the audience to care. And the thing about betrayal is that the people who betray you have already demonstrated they don't. Logos is stronger. Logos is evidence. It's the patent, the blog post, the settlement, the quiet removal of the foundation they didn't know they were standing on. But even logos requires an audience, a courtroom, a place to present the case. Ethos is the strongest and the least understood. Ethos is character. It's who you are when no one's watching, when there's no audience to perform for, no case to win. It's building a life so sound, so sturdy, so entirely yours that you don't need anyone to know what you survived or what you're owed. The revenge, if you want to call it that, is not in showing them what they lost. It's in not needing to. I still see their life sometimes, in the way you see anyone's life in a small city mutual acquaintances. Social media I haven't bothered to block. They're still together. They remodeled the house. They got a dog. Vanessa still works in UX. Sam consults, like she said, though from what I gather, the advisory work is not as lucrative or as steady as the old job, and they're careful now in ways they didn't used to be. And I think the company's sale didn't leave Sam with quite as much as he expected after taxes and splits and the quiet legal fees he never mentioned publicly. I could be wrong. I don't follow it closely. But I do know this: 2 years ago, the company that bought Sam's startup quietly discontinued the adaptive waiting feature. Not because it didn't work, it worked beautifully, but because the licensing costs and legal scrutiny made it more trouble than it was worth. And they rebuilt the platform using a different approach. And the thing Sam had spent years calling his system was phased out. And no one wrote articles about it, and he never posted about it, and it just disappeared the way most technology disappears. Not with a bang, but with a product update no one reads. I know because Elliot sent me a brief email when it happened. Just a line: thought you'd want to know. The feature's gone. Your work's been erased from their system. But the settlement stands. You still own what you built, even if they're not using it anymore. I printed that email. I keep it in my desk drawer, not to gloat over, but because it's the closest thing I have to a final draft of the whole affair. I built something. They used it without credit. I took it back. They erased it. And I'm still here, still whole, still teaching, still writing, still living a life they have no access to and no understanding of. That's not revenge. That's just the difference between a person who knows her worth and a person who needs someone else to confirm it. I thought about Vanessa more than I thought about Sam in the years after. That surprised me. The marriage ending hurt, but marriage endings are common, understandable, almost expected. We were young, we grew apart. The narrative wrote itself, but Vanessa, 19 years of friendship, of late-night calls and shared holidays and the specific intimacy of two women who've watched each other become adults, that betrayal had no easy narrative. I kept trying to locate the moment it started, the first revision, the first lie. Was it the day I introduced her to Sam? The day I told her I was filing for divorce? Or had it been there all along, some small fault line in her character I'd been too close to see? The way you don't notice a crack in a wall until the light hits it right? I'll never know. And I've made peace with that, which is its own kind of final draft, accepting that some arguments don't resolve. Some thesis statements remain unprovable, and you have to live with the ambiguity. I did write to her once, about a year after the farmer's market encounter, not to tell her about the settlement, still bound by the NDA, and still uninterested in her reaction, but because I'd been thinking about something my dissertation advisor once told me. You don't owe anyone a relationship, but you do owe yourself clarity. I wanted clarity. I wanted to know if Vanessa had ever felt guilty, or if the story she built for herself was so complete, so revised, that guilt couldn't find a foothold. So I sent an email, short, careful. I said I'd been thinking about our friendship, about the way it ended, and I wanted to understand her side of it. I didn't accuse, I didn't defend, I just asked, did you think about telling me before it started, or did it feel easier not to? She responded within an hour. The speed told me she'd been waiting for this, maybe hoping for it, maybe dreading it. Iris, she wrote, I thought about telling you 1,000 times. But you were so hurt after the divorce, and I didn't want to make it worse. And then it felt too late. And then it just felt like something that had happened, and we all had to move forward from. I know you probably hate me. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'm not sorry I'm with Sam. I'm only sorry it hurt you. I hope you found happiness too. I read it twice. The first time, I felt the old anger you didn't want to make it worse. So you just let me find out on Instagram? But the second time, I heard it differently. I heard a woman who'd workshopped this response in her head for years, who'd found the phrasing that let her keep both Sam and her self-image, who genuinely believed that "I'm sorry it hurt you" was the same as accountability. And I understood finally that Vanessa wasn't lying. She believed her own story. She'd revised it so many times that the original draft, the one where she pursued her best friend's ex-husband, while the divorce was still fresh, where she hid it, where she let me find out in the cruelest possible way, was gone. She'd edited it into something softer, something she could live with. It just felt like something that had happened. Passive voice, no agent, no choice. Just a thing the universe did, and they'd all had to move forward from. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood that no combination of words would give me what I wanted, which was for her to see the betrayal the way I'd seen it. She couldn't. She'd rewritten it. And you can't argue someone out of a story they need to believe. I deleted the email. I didn't block her. Blocking felt like it would give her too much weight, proof that she still mattered enough to curate my digital space. I just let it sit there, unanswered, and eventually she stopped appearing in my inbox. And our lives drifted further apart, the way lives do when there's nothing left holding them together. The book I published, the essay collection, had a piece in it I'd written about friendship and revision. I didn't name Vanessa "I'm not cruel," and I didn't need to be, but anyone who knew the story would recognize the shape of it. The essay was about how we revise our memories to make ourselves the heroes, how we edit out our own cruelty and amplify others, how the stories we tell ourselves are always first drafts and rarely true. It ended with a line I'm still proud of. The people who love you will read your revisions and ask questions. The people who use you will just accept the new draft and move on. A colleague told me months after the book came out that she'd seen Vanessa at a local bookstore, holding a copy, reading the table of contents. She didn't buy it, she put it back. My colleague asked if I wanted to know. I said yes, and then I realized I didn't actually care. Vanessa could read it or not. It wouldn't change her story, and it didn't need to change mine. I'm 47 now. I still teach, though I took a sabbatical last year to work on a second book. This one about silence, about the arguments we choose not to have, and what that choice costs, and what it buys. It's a harder book to write than the first, because silence is harder to analyze than speech, but I think it's the more important one. I've spent my life teaching students to argue, to build a case, to speak up. But I've learned, in the years since the divorce and the settlement and the long quiet aftermath, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've said it all already, in the life you've built, in the choices you've made, in the fact that you're still here and they're still wondering how you did it. I bought a cabin 2 years ago, up in the Cascades, an hour outside Eugene. It's small, one bedroom, a wood stove, a desk by a window that looks out at Douglas firs and fog. I go there once a month, sometimes more, and I write, and I grade, and I sit in the quiet, and I think about the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the feeling that you should have someone there. Solitude is the knowledge that you're enough on your own. I spent too many years lonely in the marriage, in the friendship, in the months after both ended when I thought I'd lost the only people who knew me. I know now I was never lonely. I was just waiting to meet myself without an audience. The settlement money sits in investments I mostly don't touch. I live modestly, not out of necessity, but because I like my life small and clear. I don't need the big house or the new car, or the visible proof of success. I have tenure. I have my cabin. I have my books and my students and the quiet satisfaction of work I care about. The money is there if I need it, and knowing it's there is enough. It's the spare key sewn into the coat lining, the thing you keep not because you expect to use it, but because it means you're never locked out. I ran into Sam once about 6 months ago at a conference in Portland. I was giving a talk on rhetorical pedagogy. He was there for a panel on adaptive systems, still dining out on the old work, still calling it his, because he genuinely didn't know any different. The company had settled quietly, and the NDA meant no public record, and as far as Sam knew, the algorithm was his, and the sale was his, and the career he built on it was earned. We made eye contact across the hotel lobby. He looked startled. I looked calm, because I was. He came over. He did the thing people do, small talk, catching up, the performance of cordiality between two people who used to share a life. He asked what I was doing there. I told him about my talk. He said, "Still teaching, huh?" in a tone I recognized. The same tone he'd used years ago when he'd said I wasn't as smart as I thought. Still teaching, I said. You? Consulting, he said, and there was a tightness in the word, a defensive edge. The market's shifted. It's a different landscape now, but I'm staying relevant, I nodded. I didn't ask about Vanessa. I didn't ask about the house or the dog or the remodel. I didn't ask if he knew the adaptive waiting feature had been discontinued, or if he'd ever wondered where the idea had come from, or if he remembered the weekend I'd handed him 20 pages and saved his company. I just said, good luck with the panel, and I walked away, and I gave my talk to a room of 70 rhetoric teachers, and I didn't think about him again for weeks. That's the thing about final drafts. You don't keep revising them, you just let them stand. There's a student I had 3 years ago, a woman named Marisol, who stayed after class one day and asked me something I think about often. She'd just gotten divorced young, 23, married at 19 to her high school boyfriend. The kind of story that writes itself. She was trying to finish her associate's degree while working 2 jobs, and she was exhausted, and she said, "Do you ever feel like you wasted time? Like I spent 4 years on someone who didn't even see me, and now I'm starting over. And I'm so far behind everyone else." I told her what I wish someone had told me at 23, which is that time with the wrong person is not wasted if it teaches you what the right life looks like, and that starting over is not the same as being behind. You're not behind, I said. You're just on a different draft. And every draft gets you closer to the version that holds. She cried a little. Then she thanked me and left. She graduated last year, transferred to Portland State, sent me an email with a photo of her at commencement. The subject line was just, final draft. I printed that email too. It's on my desk at the cabin, next to Elliot's, and sometimes I look at them both and think about the strange way a life revises itself. The way the people who hurt you become footnotes, and the people you helped become the story. And how the work you do teaching, writing, catching someone as they come through the hardest passage is the only thing that lasts. I don't know what happened to the money Sam made from the company sale. I assume he and Vanessa are fine. I assume they've built a life that looks from the outside like success. I hope in a distant way that they're happy, because their unhappiness wouldn't add anything to my happiness. And I've learned that the opposite of love is not hate. It's indifference. And I'm indifferent now in the best possible way. I don't think about them unless prompted. And when I do, it's with the mild curiosity you'd give a book you read years ago and barely remember. I'm dating someone now. His name is Terrence. He teaches environmental science at UO. We met in the faculty lounge of all places, arguing about whether the coffee was bad or just aggressively mediocre. And he made me laugh, which I'd forgotten was a thing I needed. He knows about SAM, I told him early, the way you tell someone about an old injury that mostly doesn't hurt anymore, but occasionally aches in bad weather. He knows I was married, that it ended, that I don't talk to my ex or his wife. He doesn't know about the settlement. The NDA prevents it, but also I just don't want to explain it. Because explaining it would mean making it a story, and I've worked too hard to keep it from being one. Terrence is kind. He's steady. He doesn't manage me or talk over me or assume I need saving. We've been together a year and a half. We take it slow. We're both people who've been hurt before, and we're careful with each other in the way that people who know what carelessness costs are careful. I don't know if I'll marry him. I don't know if I want to marry anyone again. But I know I like the life I have with him in it, and that's enough for now. He asked me once, after I told him about Sam, "Do you ever wish you could tell him that you won? I mean, that you came out on top?" I thought about it. No, I said, because I didn't win. There wasn't a competition. He's living his life and I'm living mine, and mine is better, but not because his is worse. Just because it's mine. Terrence nodded. He didn't push. That's how I knew he understood. There's a line I've been working on for the new book, about silence, that I haven't quite gotten right yet. It goes something like, "The loudest revenge is the life you build in the room where they're no longer speaking." It's clunky, I'm workshopping it, but the idea is sound, and I'll get there. Last month I was invited to give a keynote at a teaching conference in Seattle on pedagogy and resilience. I almost said no, I don't love the spotlight, and keynotes always feel too big, too performed. But the organizer was a former student, someone I'd taught a decade ago, and she said, "You taught me that revision is resilience. I want you to say that to a room of people who need to hear it." So I went. The talk was scheduled for a Saturday morning. I drove up Friday, checked into a hotel near the convention center, and spent the evening revising my notes, which is what I do when I'm nervous. I revise. I reworked the opening. I cut a section that felt too personal. I added a story about Marisol, the student who'd asked if she was behind. And then, because I couldn't help myself, I wrote a new ending, something I hadn't planned to say but felt true. The next morning, I stood in front of 300 teachers and I talked about revision. I talked about first drafts and how they're never meant to be final, how the process of writing is the process of discovering what you actually mean, and how teaching is the same every semester a revision, every student a new draft, every mistake a chance to try again. And then, at the end, I said the thing I hadn't planned. I used to think resilience was about bouncing back, I said, about returning to who you were before the hard thing happened. But I don't think that anymore. I think resilience is revision. It's taking what happened and rewriting yourself around it, not erasing it, not pretending it didn't hurt, but integrating it into a version of yourself that's stronger and clearer and more yours than the draft you were living before. The hard thing doesn't go away. You just get better at building a life that holds it. The room was quiet. Then someone started clapping, and then the whole room was, and I stood there feeling the specific vulnerability of having said something true in front of strangers, and I thought, this is the final draft, not the settlement, not the silence, this. Afterward, during the Q&A, a woman in the back raised her hand. She was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and the tired posture of someone who's been teaching too long in a system that doesn't value it. She said, "You talked about revision like it's always possible. But what about the things you can't revise? The people who hurt you and never apologize? The systems that don't change? The years you lost that you can't get back? How do you revise that?" It was a good question, the kind of question that doesn't have a clean answer. I thought about Vanessa, about Sam, about the 19 years and the 6 years and the 2 years it took to settle, and the quiet life I'd built after, and the fact that none of them had ever apologized. Not really, and probably never would. "You don't revise them," I said. "You revise you. You can't change what they did or what they took, but you can change what you do with what's left. You can take the years you lost and turn them into the foundation for the years you're building. That's the revision. Not fixing the past, just writing a better next chapter." She nodded. She didn't look satisfied. It's not a satisfying answer, I know. But she looked like she understood. I thought about her question on the drive back to Eugene. I thought about all the things I couldn't revise, the marriage that failed, the friendship that ended, the version of myself that had trusted too easily and assumed love was the same as loyalty. I couldn't go back and fix those. I couldn't make Vanessa a better friend or Sam a better husband. I couldn't even make myself the kind of person who saw it coming. But I could take what I'd learned about silence, about leverage, about the difference between winning an argument and living a life that doesn't need one, and I could teach it. To Marisol, to the woman in the back row, to the 700 students I've taught over 11 years who've sat in my classroom thinking their first draft is their only draft, that the story they've been handed is the story they're stuck with. That's the revision. Not changing the past, just refusing to let it write the ending. I'm writing this now, in the cabin, on a Saturday in October. The fog is thick outside the window, the kind that turns the trees into shadows, and I've been working on the silence book all morning. It's slow going. Silence is harder to write about than I expected, because it's defined by absence. And how do you make an argument about nothing? But I'm getting there, draft by draft. Terrence is coming up tomorrow. We're going to hike, or try to. The weather's been unpredictable. He's bringing groceries and a new book he thinks I'll like, and we'll cook something simple and sit by the fire and not talk about work, which is a luxury I've only recently learned to appreciate. The luxury of a life that doesn't need to be performed or proved, just lived. I haven't heard from Vanessa in over a year. No emails, no calls, no accidental encounters. Eugene's small, but not that small, and I think we've both learned to navigate it in ways that don't intersect. I assume she's fine. I assume Sam's fine. I don't check their social media anymore, not out of discipline, just lack of interest. They're characters in a story I finished writing, and I don't reread old drafts. Sometimes students ask me if I've ever had a friendship end badly, if I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone close. I usually say yes, and leave it at that. If they push, and some do, the brave ones, the ones who are living it right now, I tell them what I told the woman in Seattle. You can't revise the other person. You can only revise you. And sometimes the best revision is walking away from a story that's not working and starting a new one on a blank page. They usually nod. Some of them cry. Some of them come back years later after they've graduated and transferred and lived a little more, and they say, "Thank you, that advice saved me, I got out." Those moments are the ones I keep. Those are the final drafts that matter. I think about the patent sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. I think about the 20 pages I wrote in a weekend. The casual generosity of solving a problem for someone I loved, and how that generosity became a legal case, and a settlement, and a quiet redistribution of wealth that Sam will never know about. I think about the fact that my work, my actual intellectual labor, was worth millions, and I gave it away for free because I didn't know its value. And I only got it back because a lawyer happened to ask the right question, and I happened to have kept a blog. It could have gone differently. If I deleted the blog, if Elliot hadn't been thorough, if the company had fought harder, or if I'd been too tired to pursue it. I could have spent the rest of my life not knowing what I'd given away, watching Sam build a career on my uncredited work, believing the story he told about his own brilliance. But I did know, and I did pursue it, and I won quietly in a way that let me keep my dignity and my privacy and my life exactly as I wanted it. There's a kind of vindication in that, but it's not the vindication people expect. It's not the moment Sam learns the truth and his face goes white and he realizes what he lost. It's not the public reckoning or the apology or the scene where Vanessa understands the depth of her betrayal. None of that happened. None of it will. The vindication is this: I'm sitting in a cabin I own, writing a book I care about, living a life I built on my own terms, and the people who hurt me are not in it. They don't get to know how I survived. They don't get to watch me thrive. They're just out there somewhere, living their lives, unaware that the ground they're standing on was never as solid as they thought, because I was holding a piece of it the whole time, and I took it back and I walked away. That's the final draft. Not the one where they suffer. The one where I don't need them to. I've been thinking about what to say at the end of this, how to close it in a way that feels true. I teach closure. Every essay needs one. A return to the thesis, a final image, a sense that the argument has landed. But this isn't an essay. It's just my life, and my life doesn't have a thesis. It just has days and drafts and the slow accumulation of choices that add up to a self. But if I had to say one thing, one piece of hard-won understanding that I'd want someone else to carry, it's this: the people who hurt you are counting on you to stay hurt. They're counting on your silence to mean defeat, your privacy to mean shame, your moving on to mean you've forgotten. Don't give them that. Build a life so whole, so entirely yours, that their absence is just a fact and not a wound. Let them wonder, let them never know. And let that not knowing be the quietest, most complete victory you ever win.